Hi, my name is Alan Adler, and I'm here to talk about sustainable community life. And this podcast, which will be an ongoing series, is really all about exploring what it means to build and contribute to sustainable communities, whether those be communities of life, communities of work, or any community for that matter. We're going to dive into sustainability as a topic, as a practice, as a strategy, as an embodied sense of how to live. And really, I hope with the other guests on the show, provide you with a sense of where and how sustainability fits into your life, what you might want to do to create more sustainability, and even doing what I'm doing, which is begin an active and committed search to finding a sustainable community. But I think everything begins really with a question of what do we mean by sustainability? It's such a overused term and oftentimes the throwaway term, sustainable business, sustainable agriculture, sustainable this and that. And I picked the term sustainable community life because I thought each of those three words really were speaking to an imperative, a critical imperative in this time and day of the polycrisis. What I mean by each of those three words requires some consideration, but I want to start with the second and third word, community and life. First of all, I believe that we are, as a species, meant to live in community, to live and to work in community. That doesn't mean, of course, that we shouldn't have our own individuality and our own sense of purpose, because without that, quite frankly, we don't have the basis to contribute to community. But community itself as a topic is more than just I need to be in community because that's where I get things done. It really raises the question of whether or not human beings and community are really part and parcel of the same thing. The human species, in my opinion, needs to live in community in order for there to be a contribution to each individual life and for each individual life to contribute to the whole. And when I use the word community, I think it's important to distinguish between intentionality, where in a community of whatever work or business decides to pursue something that it is committed to and is part of the underlying fabric of why those people are coming together, versus non-intentional community life. And I would argue that the vast majority of us, particularly those of us who live in big cities, live in a non-intentional way. Or that intentionality, and perhaps this is the central point, that intentionality lives explicitly in a me-centric ideology. And back to the question of why community and why sustainable community life, I believe that only when we live intentionally in a we-centric way can we create equitability, resilience, a social robustness, and a compelling and meaningful life, individually and collectively. So that's really all about the word community. And I'll, in future podcasts, really get into this whole question of how does intentionality and community influence discussions of we-centricity versus me-centricity and other aspects like that. But the third word, life, is really important because much in the same way as I could live an isolated life, or I could live an integrated life with others, or an intentional, intimate life with others, life asks the question, what life and whose life? And when I think about sustainable community life, I think about contributing to a well-being that transcends the individual from the standpoint of what's good for me, and asks the question, what's good for we? What's good for me with those I love? What's good for me with others I don't know? What's good for me with the planet? What does my contribution to this life need to look like? And I believe that when we use the word community life, we bring into the topic the central question of, are we leaving the world better than we came into it? And do we have the potential to create a life that actually is resilient? And now we're back to that very first word of sustainability. So I think we can address the question of sustainable community life by replacing that word with many other words: regenerative, resilient, agile. But the reason I think sustainability is such an important word, especially when connected with community and life, is because I believe that humans, are on a collision course with our extinction. And so we oftentimes think about sustainability in terms of sustainability from an ecological perspective. But what about sustainability from a species perspective? What if we sit with the observation, I think it's a fact, but let's just call it a hypothesis or an assumption, that today humanity as a species is not sustainable. We cannot continue to survive, the 9 billion or how many of us there are on the planet, unless we fundamentally change the way we live in community and change the way we view our lives. And so when I think about sustainability in community, I think of it at the holistic aspect of how can we live together with each other, with the animals and the plants, with the sky, with the water, with the amazing, beautiful, and resourceful planet that we have been gifted with, in such a way that we thrive, others among us thrive in an equitable way, and that we are resilient in the sense that we can address the shocks to the system, which there will be many in the coming years and decades, and do so in a way that actually achieves 4 fundamental layers of sustainability, all of which are interlocking with each other. The first layer of sustainability is ecological. That is to say, have we figured out a way to live with nature in such a way that we don't take more than nature provides? I heard a statistic that, at least in the U.S., we consume 5 Earths. In other words, each human on the Earth, each human in the West and in the U.S., Western Europe, etc., consumes 5 times the resources that the Earth can provide. So if everybody consumed like we do in the West, we would need 5 Earths to sustain that. I know for a fact that we, as a species, consume more resources than the Earth can provide, and that is unsustainable ecologically. When that happens, you start getting resource shortage, you start seeing pollution, you start seeing climate destruction, you start seeing ecosystem habitats falling apart, biodiversity being impacted, you name it, ecological problems, soil being eroded. There are so many planetary threats. If you look at the Stockholm Institute, that studies 9 thresholds for when we've crossed into planetary distress, and I believe we've crossed 7 of them. So clearly we got an ecological problem on our hands. Clearly we are not sustainable with respect to the ecology. The next area of sustainability is economic sustainability. Any community that wants to be agile, that wants to be resilient, that wants to be able to address itself from the standpoint of what is needed from a financial, monetary perspective, needs to address the question of economic sustainability. Economic sustainability has dimensions such as, is there equitable opportunity for everyone to participate? Many societies and many communities are just fine if you're wealthy, but if you're not, you're either going to be working there and finding someplace else to live, or you're not even going to be given opportunities at all. So that's not economic sustainability at an equitability perspective. Economic sustainability also addresses the question of whether the community has the access to the resources it needs in order to meet its basic needs, or in order to provide some aspect of social sustainability or resource sustainability, which are the other 2 categories of sustainability. So let's take social. So social is the big one because social has many dimensions. Social has the dimension of how does it feel to live in community? Do I feel seen? Do I have the opportunity to engage in the intimate relationships that I wish? Is the community providing me with access to the kinds of support that I need from the standpoint of my health, my emotional, psychological, physical well-being? Do I have access to the resources that I need in order to take care of myself? It also addresses the whole question of psychology. Is the community able to address my own individual needs, how my individual's needs relate to other people's needs? Do I have a way of addressing conflicts, or am I living in a state where conflicts and traumas are not addressed at all? And finally, the whole sort of question of meaning and purpose. So from a spiritual or from a meaning perspective, is the community resilient from the standpoint of offering those social characteristics that are so important? And the final characteristic of sustainability pertains to resource availability. I thought hard and fast about this one because when you do research on sustainability, the 3 ones that I mentioned are really obvious: economic, ecological, and social. Often social is broken into several other dimensions: socio-political, spiritual, communal, but I put them all into social because it's all about things that have to do with people, how they feel, how they think, how they behave. But the resource one is really important because even if we are ecologically sustainable, economically sustainable, and socially sustainable, we may not have access to the resources that we need. Or to get the resources that we need, we have to compromise on one of those other elements. And at the end of the day, there is a minimum required amount of resourcing that is necessary for a society or a community to be sustainable. And it's very important that when community planning is done, that considerations of access to natural resources, in particular, water, food, energy, is the three things we don't want to have too few of: food, energy, water, few. If the resources aren't available, that will generally put pressure on either the economic, the social, or the ecological in order to provide for those resources. So those are the four elements of a sustainability. I was really tempted to look at spirituality or meaning as its own category, but increasingly I'm finding that spiritual sustainability is such a subjective perspective, for that matter, so is emotional and even social generally, that it's really up to a community to evaluate how it wants to approach its spirituality. Does it want to have a spiritual practice that carries forward across the community? Does it want to have completely open? And I'm starting to observe communities that function well when they don't have a spiritual base, function poorly when they don't, and the same thing with the spiritual side. That's it for now. I wanted to just lay out the foundations of what I think about sustainability, and I can't wait to get your thoughts.